The Wednesday, September 5th, 2018 meeting of the Edina City Council. Roll call, please.
Member Brindle.
Here.
Member Fisher.
Here.
Member Staunton.
Here.
Member Stewart.
Here.
Mayor Hovland.
Here. We have a form of meeting agenda in front of us this evening, and Manager Neal, I think you wanted to remove 5F. The consent agenda, is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to remove that from tonight's agenda. It's the approval of a ZAO small cell co-location agreement. It's not quite ready for council action tonight.
Okay. All right. With that change, with any other changes, otherwise we'll adopt the amended meeting agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the meeting agenda as modified by Manager Neal? Is there a second? Got a motion and second to adopt the meeting agenda with the exclusion of 5F. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Before we go to community comment, I think there's at least one other agenda item that we want to deal with, and that is, Member Staunton, was that 5D?
Well, when we get to consent agenda.
5D on, wait a minute, we were going to remove that from the consent agenda. So,
Do you want to wait till we get to that, or
well, so we approved the consent agenda.
we haven't yet?
We haven't approved the consent agenda. Why don't we wait till we get there?
Okay.
Yeah, good point. Okay, let's go to community comment. Are there folks in the audience who wish to address the council on a matter of concern to them? And yes, come on up, and one of those side podiums would be best, unless you have an overhead that you want to use.
No overheads tonight.
And,
I do have notes. Would you like these, or I can pass
Sure,
them?
if you want to make those part of the record, you can hand them to the clerk, and then
Okay.
we'll and you can go back and start your presentation. And I think someone probably mentioned early on you'd have 3 minutes, and we'll give you a heads up when you get close. You'll see that yellow light, and then you'll have 30 seconds left.
Okay.
Okay, good. Welcome.
Good. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Hovland, council members, and city officials. And thank you for hearing my concerns today regarding the new parking restrictions next to Edina High School.
All right,
My name is Lisa Lee,
Thank you.
and I live at 6012 Shane Drive. I am against the no parking regulations on Shane Drive. We have not had a problem with student parking on our street, and I believe that the solution to the high school parking problem has fallen onto the shoulders of the residents by taking away our ability to freely park in front of our homes, not to mention the parking tickets that we will accrue in the future. At 8:30 a.m. on the first day of school, 2 Edina police officers were patrolling Shane Drive and preparing to issue tickets to 3 of my carpenters who are remodeling my home. The police didn't issue tickets to my carpenters or contractors because we were able to squeeze them and their trucks onto the driveway and a neighbor's driveway. However, I cannot impose on our neighbors on a daily basis. It's disruptive and an imposition. That is just one example of how the no parking regulation is a restriction on residents and impinges on our ability to live a normal life. Other examples are book clubs, social gatherings, multiple drivers in a household, home repairs, and Tuesday realtor open houses. And that's why I'm here today to request the following. That 1, residents, their guests, visitors, and service people be exempt from the parking restriction. And to do that, to identify the exempted residents, is to have city-issued placards placed in the car in the dashboard. And 3, to provide recourse if a visitor is issued a ticket without the placard when a homeowner can't be home to issue one. And I do believe 2 of our residents on the street did receive tickets. Thank you for your time and attention to this matter that affects the quality of life on our street. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Lee, thank you very much.
Yep.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. My name is Frank Lorenz, 7151 York Avenue South. I'd like to comment on the police force staffing. Sometime in 2017, the City Council commissioned a study from a public safety consulting firm in Chicago, and they recommended that within a 10-year period, the city had 20 sworn officers and 1 additional ambulance unit. At the conclusion of that presentation, Mayor Hovland commented that, well, this is something that we can put on the agenda in the next 10 years. However, within about 6 months of that time, the city hired 4 additional sworn officers, and their cost, including salaries and fringe benefits and overtime, is about $100,000 a year each. And for every 2 officers that you hire, you have to buy a new SUV squad car. It has to be an SUV in order to handle all the electronic and telecommunications equipment that squad car has to haul around. That's another $90,000 times 2. It's not clear exactly why we needed those people that fast or what exactly they're going to do, but we already have a police officer who's won the state of Minnesota award for the most DWI arrests, and he peruses the Highway 62, 169, 100, and 494, pulling people over for speeding, and then he'll suggest that they're drunk. As I understand it, his salary and fringe benefits are paid by a grant from the state of Minnesota. So financially, I don't care what he does. But if the additional officers are going to go out on the highways instead of actually executing public safety work within the city, I'm not sure that we need to spend that money. However, in the effort to be helpful, I could observe that Edina public service officers, whether they're fire or ambulance or police, are called to horrendous accidents on all 4 of the major highways, or maybe it's 5 now, that are within the boundaries of Edina. And the police squad cars may be the first to arrive, although they don't carry a jaw of life hydraulic unit or a defibrillator. Police officers are trained and they can start CPR, and in the critical 5 minutes, they're saving lives until the ambulance comes, or they're pulling people out of burning cars or whatever. So from a standpoint of return on investment, if you add the full 20 officers, that would be something like $2+ million a year. You could argue that if they save 12 or 15 lives a year in these horrendous crashes, you're saving the insurance companies and the medical establishment $3 to $4 million a year. So it's probably a good investment from the standpoint of the county of Hennepin and the state of Minnesota.
Mr. Lorenz, I need to have you wrap up.
Okay, but I think there needs to be some restraint on what size the police force should grow to before we actually get population growth.
Thank you, Mr. Lorenz. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am. Good evening.
Actually, I have something. Hi, my name is Nikki Williams, and I live at 3915 Morningside Road. The house next door to us was sold to an investor, and the builder C. Allen Homes was attached to the project. In July 2017, the tear down of the house began. During excavation, we could see the ground falling away along the west side of our driveway, which was beginning to shift and sink. The excavation company used the bucket of a backhoe as a hammer to install their shoring pipes. This caused cracking in the stucco of our house and garage. After emails and conversations with several city employees in inspections, we were informed that the builder was passing their inspections and following code, yet there was not code to protect our property and the city could not help us. We were told, quote, "The city views this as 2 private property owners working out differences." As my husband and I discussed, if someone showed up with a jackhammer and tore up your driveway, you'd call the police. But if a builder has a backhoe and a permit, it's somehow okay. We ended up hiring a structural engineer on our own. He determined our driveway was not safe for cars and called us immediately to confirm that we would no longer use it until their foundation was poured and the ground was stabilized. In August 2017, we began working with an attorney. Over this last winter, we discovered additional cracking of the stucco. We hired a structural engineer again to review our entire property this past spring. Along with the driveway and the stucco damage, the engineer found that the garage foundation was sinking on the west side and required a helical pier system to fix it. We filed a lawsuit when the builder, investor, and excavation company refused to cover their damages. Negotiations with their insurance companies and our attorney eventually settled at $46,000 to be paid on a bill of over $58,000 for the 3 major expenses. We also had structural engineer fees and 13 months of legal fees. So these additional fees combined with the difference in the settlement equal over $21,000 out of pocket. The city employees and elected officials that I've spoken with have been very respectful and sympathetic, but ultimately haven't done anything to help us. I've heard from numerous residents about their own construction damage experiences to know that our situation, while maybe more extreme, is not unique. And I don't expect that the city could have prevented all of this. But it is frustrating to know that the builder showing process passed inspection while several feet away our driveway was sinking toward the giant hole in the ground. It's one thing for the city to not get involved in neighborly disputes, but another to turn a blind eye on its residents when they're up against a business. The city of Edina needs code to protect the properties around new construction sites. The type of code that if you're a competent and courteous builder, it's not that difficult to comply. We've been through a large home remodel, and are familiar with the amount of city inspections, code, and variance requirements within that process. And yet during the construction process next door, we saw practices so unsafe that we eventually worked with the St. Paul OSHA office. The difference in how the city monitors new builds versus remodels is striking. I'm asking to please look at what can be done to help protect residents from builders like this. Thank you for all of your efforts. They are very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Williamson, thank you for this information. We'll all look it over and talk to staff about it. Thank you. Yes, sir. Mr. Potts, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. Well, we had another full day of rain yesterday, and in light of that, I want to discuss and suggest a proactive action plan for flood protection.
If you don't mind giving your name and address,
Yes,
please.
sorry.
Sorry, Ken Potts, 4236 Crocker Avenue.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Member Stewart.
So for 5 years or so, council's been hearing a lot of informational reports from staff to provide background on what's happening and what can be done about it. And arguably in that time, more harm has happened than improvements have been made in the situation. A couple of recent items, staff has been quoted in the Sun Current saying, "We don't have a limit on impervious cover, and it's causing us to go backwards in our flood protection efforts." Staff has also noted that residential lots can be developed to a degree of 100% imperviousness, which only causes more runoff. At one of your work plans, Councilmember Stewart noted that there is a need for some remedial work. There's some recognition that you've gone past the line here, but it's really time that the whole council moves forward and takes some action plans. You've got enough information. No more input is needed. No more studies need to be done, but it's really time for an action policy. I've seen mentioned in some of the staff reports a suggestion that transformation is generational. That implies that there's plenty of time to act. I would suggest a different approach, something like more pipes, less paving right now. Please put an action plan in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Potts. Anyone else on concerns of residents? All right, certainly some good thoughts tonight from our residents, so we appreciate them all. Thank you. We'll move on to the next portion of the agenda, which is the consent agenda. And before we have a motion to adopt the consent agenda, I think we have a motion with regard to 5D.
Yes,
Member Staunton?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to pull 5D from the consent agenda for discussion.
Did you want to, okay, all right. Did you want to make a motion relative to 5D plus tabling it to a date certain?
Well,
Or do you want to discuss it first?
I'd like to discuss it
Okay.
before
All right.
we act on it.
We've got Councilmember Staunton requesting the removal of 5D from the consent agenda. Is there anyone else on the council that wishes to remove any other item from the consent agenda? All right. Then I will entertain a motion to adopt the consent agenda with the exception of 5D, which has been requested to be removed from the consent agenda. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion second to adopt the consent agenda with the exception of 5D. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, carried. And then back to 5D, Member Staunton.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. So I have some concerns about the draft agenda, or the draft resolution denying the final rezoning, and I would like to suggest that we ask staff for further work on the topic and bringing it back at a subsequent meeting. Generally, when we act on final approvals, when we have a two-step process, we provide preliminary approval, and then we include in the preliminary approval certain conditions, and those are really the things that the developer needs to live up to in order to get final approval. And so as I looked through the factual findings and the kind of rationale for the denial that's in the draft resolution, it looks to me like it doesn't necessarily align with those conditions that were part of the preliminary approval, and I'd like us to kind of make those align more clearly with those conditions, and then bring that back for subsequent action. I understand the deadline for action is September 20th, so if we act at our next meeting, we're still within the deadline. Is that right?
Okay. So your motion would be to table Resolution 2018-63 and attendant elements of it to the September 20th meeting?
Right, with staff to redraft and re-present it to us.
All right. Is there a second on that motion?
I'll second.
Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried?
Did we vote on the consent agenda?
Just did.
Oh,
We did. You were right on top of it, too.
I know I had seconded it, I just couldn't remember
All right. That completes the work on the consent agenda, and we'll move on to the special recognitions and presentations portion of the agenda. And we have Sarah Patzloff with us this evening, and Sarah, if you want to come up and stand by here, I'll read the proclamation. We got a proclamation regarding Constitution Week, and Sarah Patzloff, a member of our school board, is here. It seems like annually regarding Constitution Week, and we thank you for that.
Coordination of Deborah Mangan.
And the Constitution Week proclamation reads as follows: whereas it is a privilege of all Americans to commemorate the 230th anniversary of the drafting of the Constitution of the United States of America with appropriate ceremonies and activities, and whereas it is fitting and proper to officially recognize this magnificent document and the anniversary of its creation, and whereas Public Law 915 guarantees the issuance of a proclamation by the President of the United States of America designating September 17 through 23 as Constitution Week. Therefore, I, James B. Hovland, by virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the city of Edina, do hereby proclaim the week of September 17 through 23 as Constitution Week, and urge all citizens to study the Constitution, reflect on the privilege of being an American, with all the rights and responsibilities that privilege involves, and reaffirm the ideals of the Constitution. And I'm going to ask the council to move this as a council proclamation. Is there a motion to adopt the proclamation involving Constitution Week?
So moved.
Second.
A motion second to adopt the Constitution Week proclamation, which would proclaim the week of September 17 through 23 as Constitution Week. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And Ms. Pasloff, I'll bring this down to you.
Great.
And then if you have a few words for us?
Yes, I just want to thank you, Mayor Hovland, and City Council members, and Deborah for always helping with this. On behalf of the Monument Chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution, we thank you for this proclamation, but I really thank you on behalf of our city, that we acknowledge that we have this great Constitution and that it doesn't matter who we are, right, left, female, male, whoever, rich, poor, this Constitution protects us as American citizens. And so I thank you for taking the time every year to acknowledge this.
Thank you for being here.
Just one note, I'm looking at I didn't read all the way to the bottom of the proclamation, but it says 2017, so we should make that 2018. Okay.
Do you want me to make a...
Yes, that would make it 234.
All right. All right, and the final proclamation we have in this portion of the agenda is a proclamation on Extra Mile Day 2018. And that proclamation reads as follows: whereas Edina, Minnesota is a community which acknowledges that a special vibrancy exists within the entire community when its individual citizens collectively go the extra mile in personal effort, volunteerism, and service. And whereas Edina, Minnesota is a community which encourages its citizens to maximize their personal contribution to the community by giving of themselves wholeheartedly and with total effort, commitment, and conviction to their individual ambitions, family, friends, and community. And whereas Edina, Minnesota is a community which chooses to shine a light on and celebrate individuals and organizations within its community who go the extra mile in order to make a difference and to lift up fellow members of their community. And whereas Edina, Minnesota acknowledges the mission of Extra Mile America to create 550 extra mile cities in America and is proud to support Extra Mile Day on November 1, 2018. Now, therefore, the Edina City Council of Edina, Minnesota does hereby proclaim November 1, 2018 to be Extra Mile Day and urges each individual in the community to take time on this day to not only go the extra mile in his or her own life, but to also acknowledge to all those who are inspirational in their efforts and commitment to make their organizations, families, community, country, or world a better place. Is there a motion to adopt the Extra Mile 2018 proclamation?
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion second to adopt the Extra Mile Day 2018 proclamation. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. We'll pass this down to the clerk and she'll get it to the appropriate people.
Mr. Mayor, the Boy Scout slogan is "Do a good turn daily." Since we have a Boy Scout in the audience, maybe he'd like to receive the proclamation.
He's shaking his head sideways, not up and down. All right. That completes our work on that portion of the agenda. We have one public hearing matter in front of us this evening, and Don Urim has this, our finance director has this matter. Director Urim, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Before I introduce representatives from the transaction tonight, Nathan Conovan from Dorsey Whitney and Craig Root from Fairview Health Services, I just wanted to explain that the approval before you tonight is host approval only for the City of Minneapolis to issue bonds on behalf of Fairview. This, under no circumstances, obligates the City of Edina for any obligation in regards to the bonds, will not affect our credit rating, or will have no other bond impacts for us. So with that, I'd ask Nathan to come up and kind of describe the project.
Good evening. Would you identify yourself again, please, and give us your business address?
Nathan Canova with the law firm of Dorsey and Whitney, 50 South 6th Street, Minneapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Canova.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. We bring before you a resolution tonight to approve the issuance by the City of Minneapolis of healthcare revenue bonds. The transaction, like Mr. Urim says, is not an obligation of the City of Edina. It's an obligation of ultimately Fairview to repay the debt service on the bonds. It's a refinancing transaction primarily with a small new money piece. There are new projects in the City of Minneapolis as well as some projects at Southdale Hospital here in the city. The financing is a refinancing of several series of bonds from 2008, but together the issue is approximately $550 million. We'll be issuing 3 series of bonds on a tax-exempt basis through, again, the City of Minneapolis. And we request tonight the approval of the City of Edina as host to one of those facilities that are being refinanced, as well as host to approximately $4 million in new money improvements.
Okay. Mr. Canova, I think it would be helpful to the residents in our community to know why under Section 147F we need to contemplate this resolution passage.
Sure. Under Section 147F of the Code, of the Internal Revenue Code, there is a requirement that all host cities or all cities in which facilities are financed, whether or not they issue the bonds, approved by public hearing or after a public hearing, the issuance of the bonds. So we come to you as a requirement under the federal tax code.
Okay, good. Thank you. That's going to be helpful, I think. This may be for Mr. Urim question. I think when we've seen these in other years, there's some administrative work that's involved because we are a host city of a Fairview-related facility, and there's a fee, I think, that at least I've seen in the past, or I recall, that gets paid to the host city for providing its management role with respect to the bonds. Is that the situation in this particular matter?
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, in this specific case, it doesn't, because the City of Edina is not issuing the bonds. So if we would have been kind of the conduit issuer, we would have charged a fee. The only time spent from a staff perspective is a little bit of my time to, prepare the resolution or to prepare the staff reports for council approval. Fairview has paid all the fees for Dorsey and Whitney and everything else. So from that perspective, very little effort on the City of Edina's part.
All right. So as you point out, no risk for the taxpayers of the City of Edina, no affect of our credit rating or limitation on our borrowing capacity.
That's correct.
All right. Is the gentleman from Fairview here that would you like to comment at all before we go to public hearing?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Canova, too. Stand by for a moment, please.
My name is Craig Root. I'm with Fairview Health Services. I'm the Director of Treasury. Our business address is 400 Stinson Avenue, Stinson Boulevard Northeast in Minneapolis. It pleases the mayor and the council. We are excited about the project, actually. It does result in about $100 million of new money that's going to be spent on various projects throughout the system, mostly related to the University of Minnesota Medical Center, with a small amount actually coming to improve projects or improve some space here in Southdale. So we do see a benefit to the city. We see a benefit, obviously, to us, so we can better serve our patients. And we ask that the city council consider this a resolution and approve it so that we can move forward.
All right, thank you. Any of the council members have questions for Mr. Roots or Mr. Canova at this point in time? Okay, gentlemen, stand by. I'll let you sit down. And this is a public hearing matter. I'm going to open this up now for public testimony, either questions or concerns that folks have. Anyone that cares to testify regarding this matter, please feel free to come forward. The hearing is now open. Hearing nothing and seeing no one coming forward, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
Second.
Got a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Discussion, all those in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. We have a resolution 2018-78 regarding this matter that our finance director recommends we approve. We can approve it on voice vote with a simple majority. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution 2018-78? Okay. Got a motion and a second from Member Brindle. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you. That completes the public hearing portion of the agenda. And then we are on to reports and recommendations, and this was a matter that we held over. It's a potential adoption of the 2018 Comprehensive Water Resources Management Plan, and Jessica Wilson, our Water Resources Coordinator, has this matter for us this evening. Ms. Wilson, welcome.
Thank you.
And Mr. Bittner, welcome as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Milner extends his regrets. He had a family emergency and he wasn't able to join us for this part of the meeting tonight.
All right.
You gotta go home and watch it on TV.
That's
All right, thank you. I'm happy to be here on behalf of the engineering department. We're really excited and proud to bring you this body of work, and we're seeking council adoption of the 2018 Comprehensive Water Resources Management Plan tonight. So I have some slides here, really brief. I want to tell you a little bit about, give you a little bit of background about this plan. The Comprehensive Water Resources Management Plan defines policies, identifies issue areas, prioritizes projects, and plans implementation activities around 3 core services: flood protection, stormwater runoff management, and clean surface water. And this plan is one of 3 pretty technical water plans that feed into the water resources chapter of the comp plan. And so that's what I'm showing on the slide here, is kind of how all these pieces fit together. So this local water plan is pretty technical, along with like the water supply plan and the sanitary plan. And they're tools that practitioners use to guide that service delivery in the city of Edina. The water resources chapter in the comp plan, which is a later process that this plan supports, is that opportunity to coalesce those water plans and describe the service in the context of all of those services that we provide for water, not just surface water. And so that's our opportunity to really higher level describe how we manage water in the city of Edina. We've done a lot of work to get to this point. We kicked off this project in June of 2016, and over the course of that time developed an updated model, spent a lot of time really thinking critically about policy and implementation activities for this water management strategy that we have. And I think what this plan demonstrates is a deep understanding of our system, and we sought agency approval. Metropolitan Council issued a approval noting that the City of Edina plan was really impressive and it was a model for other cities. We were also one of the first out of the gate, so I think that maybe helped us a little bit. But we're really proud of what we put together for our model, and I think we really understand our system and the constraints for our system. I think it also demonstrates innovation in addressing flooding and clean water issues throughout the city with a mix of policy and capital investment and programs. These are difficult, complex problems to solve, and I think it also demonstrates a really mature understanding of those challenges, opportunities, the policy gaps, and the trade-offs when it comes to managing water resources. So I want to summarize a little bit about what has changed. So through this process, we've sought some public comment. We've been in front of the Planning Commission and in front of City Council in a couple of work sessions. So what has changed since the last time that City Council saw a draft of the Comprehensive Water Resources Management Plan? We spent a lot of time developing our coordination plan at the request of the Watershed District, Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. We do a lot of partnership with them, so we really described ways that we can leverage the work that the Watershed District is already doing. And then we also heard, what are we going to do to make this plan really actionable? And how are we going to make some measurable improvements over the lifespan of this plan? And so we've outlined a couple key strategies: a flood risk reduction strategy and a clean water strategy, recognizing that going to that level of effort wasn't possible within this Comprehensive Water Resources Management Plan framework. However, we could set up a process to go to that level to answer some of those questions and help guide you in making decisions about when do we implement projects, to what level and on what time frame, what are our goals? And so we think the flood risk reduction strategy and the clean water strategy, which are yet to come, will help to guide a lot of that discussion, and you guys will have a lot of influence on the decisions. And some of that will be information that we pull together to help guide that discussion. As far as when those pieces of our will come to fruition, in the draft CIP, we're proposing that flood risk reduction strategy for 2019 and the clean water strategy for 2020. And we chose those in series and based on opportunities that are already out there or forthcoming so that we can leverage those. So the flood risk reduction strategy, we heard council's feedback about Morningside being a priority area. So we've called that out in the plan as Morningside neighborhood as the area that we're going to focus on for that flood risk reduction strategy. And then we heard that Lake Cornelia was a concern and would be the priority for the clean water strategy. So those elements are going to focus around those key geographies. So the 2019 flood risk reduction strategy syncs up well with some roadway reconstruction projects in the Morningside neighborhood that we have tentatively planned for 2022 and 2023. So that early work planning for flood risk reduction could feed into those later capital projects when we'll be in that space and have some opportunity. The 2020 clean water strategy syncs up well with some work that other agencies are already doing related to Lake Cornelia. 9 Mile Creek Watershed District is actually working on a scientific study now to really understand the inputs of pollutants to Lakes Cornelia and Edina, actually. And then the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is also doing a lot of work identifying what kind of loads we would have to reduce pollutants by in order to reach those goals. So those things are happening right now. So by doing our clean water strategy in 2020, we benefit by letting them do that scientific study, then we can leverage those things and use that to inform our management strategy as we move forward. So those are the key changes that we made since the last time we saw you, was identifying those key geographies was a major one. And then I think there was a question about, how do we program these things so they happen? And that CIP is our way of programming those plans and then moving on to that next step. And then the last thing I want to share with you is how we're getting the word out about our 2018 Comprehensive Water Resources Management Plan, which is not a sexy topic. So it's hard to get people to really want to chat about stormwater all the time. But this is, as I was putting this together, I was recognizing the really helpful role that our communications department played in really trying to describe this really complex topic in a way that engages people. And so through the Public Works Pipeline, About Town, Edition Edina, Agenda Edina, and our city website, we're trying to get people engaged around stormwater. It can be complex, but I think with the help of our really talented communications department, we're getting people on board with that topic. So with that, I'll stand for any questions that you have.
Good. Questions for Ms. Wilson. Member Staunton?
Thank you for the work. It's a comprehensive plan, certainly, all 430 some pages of it. A couple of things that I just wanted to highlight, and then I have some questions. This screen is a good one because in the lower left-hand corner is the water resources map, which, as I understand it, is a newly developed tool. And to the extent folks are watching, I think it's a real attention grabber because and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it converts what used to be data that was out there that we might use in any particular instance to an entire user interface interactive map.
Yeah, and it used to be, in former plans when we didn't really quite have the technology, it would be in paper maps or in a series of tables and charts, and the average person wouldn't really even know what that means without doing a lot of review over topography data. So I think this is a really visual way and really accessible way for people to see this. I also want to mention too, on the whole spectrum of how transparent you are about flood risk, there's not publishing anything at all, and then there's what Edina did, which is to make it available online so that everyone can fully understand their risk. It helps inform multiple departments as we're all planning projects, and then we can be more comprehensive when we're doing other standalone projects. We can leverage maybe what the Parks Department is doing or public works or engineering, we can all feed into those discussions. So I think when we were deciding, what level of, how much do we want to share with this flood risk? And when we're talking about risk, I think we decided people ought to know what their flood risk is. And so I think we're kind of a standout in that realm of being really transparent about where those areas are.
Because with this map, you can basically go onto the website and you can zoom in on your own neighborhood, your own house, your own street, and it will show you in color coding where the 10-year flood risk is and where the 100-year flood risk is. Is that right?
I can't recall if the 10 years on there or not. Is it?
I think it is. I think there's like
Yeah, I
a
think it
blue
is.
color coding for the 10 and gold for the 100. And of course, as you've reminded us a number of times, those are perhaps misleading names, because the 100-year flood risk doesn't mean once you have one that you won't have one for another 99 years. It means that every year you have a 1% chance that it will happen.
Yeah, great. Good
How
job.
about it? Am I getting it? All right,
Yes.
good. I'm trainable. And it's actually...
We see a future for you in water resources.
I think I'll keep my day job. It's actually a pretty alarming map. All joking aside, we have a lot of areas in the community that are at flood risk, some in the 10-year, some in the 100-year. And we know as the climate is changing and as we're continuing to develop, that those two forces are perhaps accelerating the flood risk as well. And I'm appreciative of the chicken egg issue here in terms of how we figure out how to address these issues, but realizing we can't have a complete plan for how to address them until we investigate what works more. But having said that, I think this is an important document that it does a great job of setting where we are and what the list of potential infrastructure issues are. And I applaud staff for working within current budget constraints. You didn't come to us and say, we have to spend all this money. You said, assuming we're spending what we're spending, here's how we would deal with this. And so that includes a lot of policy changes that may bend the curve over time. And the question that I think we need to ask ourselves as policymakers, and we need to ask our public, is, are there more aggressive interventions we should consider in order to bend the curve more quickly? And I want to just have a conversation among us as a council about how we proceed from here. We've got a great document that really identifies what the issues are and where the issues are right now. And as you've talked about, there's a plan in the future to try to do a strategy on flood management and a strategy on water resources management or water quality management. But I'd like the document to put a stake in the ground and say ultimately that we're going to be more aggressive or we're going to make greater interventions. And before we do that, I'd like to have some sense from members of the public about what they think about that. And so I don't know if you have thoughts on how we go about doing that, or if there are things that we should be thinking about as we're considering that issue.
Yeah, and I think what we proposed in our early draft is kind of an incremental approach that looks at taking advantage of capital investment opportunities when they're present, and also a lot through our program of our permitting program. And as these properties redevelopment, perhaps there's different standards that we apply to those properties. I think what we're going to find with our flood risk reduction strategy is the engineering, the conventional engineering approach of build it bigger, build it deeper, put in more pipes, is going to be really challenging to fund and to find the space to actually build. So I think that's why our initial draft kind of incorporated some of those more long-term, things that we don't really drive the timeline on. So as redevelopment occurs, we're going to take advantage of those opportunities. There's that capital investment option, but capital investment alone and the engineering, the conventional engineering approach alone, I don't know that we'll get there. So I think it's a mix, and I think it's going to take a long time, and I think it's going to take a lot of investment.
And so I think, I mean, the question that I'd like to frame for some discussion tonight, but as well as for input from members of the public before we kind of finally adopt this, is where do we want to put the stake in the ground on how aggressive to be, recognizing that we need to learn more as we go along. But my intuition from just the interactive map and from reviewing the document is that we need to be more aggressive and assertive in terms of capital improvement changes, and not in addition to these policy changes that will make things better over time.
Member Stewart?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, Ms. Wilson, thank you again, and Mr. Bintner. The plan is a truly comprehensive plan, quite long to read, and because I had read it when we prepared for this at an earlier meeting, I appreciated that in the more recent documents, when there were some modifications, you called out where those were and what they were, so it helped me to get through the review more quickly this time. Thank you for that. Mr. Mayor, I know that you often during mayor and member comments talk about the issues that are raised during the community comment at the beginning of the meeting. This might be a good time to talk a little bit about the issues and concerns raised by Ken Potts in the community comment period of the meeting. He talked about wanting to have additional rules for pervious versus impervious surfaces for construction, particularly on home sites, I believe. Ms. Wilson, in your judgment, I don't know if you heard Mr. Potts' testimony, but does this plan seem to address most of what his concerns were?
I think what this plan does is identifies those issues and then really identifies the challenges in solving them. So I think part of why this plan is still kind of up in the air is that we don't have a nice answer at the end of this plan that says, and this is how we solve it. And that uncertainty can be really dissatisfying. And we fully understand that, and I think this plan is really honest about the real challenges and the real risks that people are facing when it comes to flooding concerns, and then also those clean water issues that we have too. I think when we talk about those conventional engineering approaches to solving the problem, I think what we'll find through those additional studies is that we're trying to consider the space that we have available to do that, the funding that we have available to do that, and then also transferring risk around. So we have to make sure we're sensitive when we think about solving issues in Morningside. We could certainly put bigger pipes in all over. We could certainly build big ponds, but there's some trade-offs for that. And are we willing to go there? I think we've struggled in our department with, how fast should we move? How much do we spend? Where do we push this risk? Because we can't just make it disappear. And I think some of those policy decisions are going to have to be made at a higher level, and those are tough policy decisions to make. And so I think what we can do is help provide enough information so that you can have some meaningful discussion and make some of those policy decisions. I think when we were initially thinking in our implementation plan, what should we program? What are we going to solve? And we recognized that the problems were really big, and that setting the pace and the goal was not something that we could just do in our department alone. And so I think this sets up a framework to have that greater discussion that would help guide that implementation going forward.
Right. And of course, to say there are a couple of areas that are focus or an emphasis, because Morningside has a number of spots with flooding issues. There are also other places that are not in Morningside that are in Edina that have flooding issues, and I'm sure the residents who live in those spots say, well, focus on my spot. So we are not ignoring other spots. We're trying to create a comprehensive plan. We do recognize that there's some special problems in the Morningside area. Lake Cornelia is another area where we've had a clean water challenge, but Lake Edina similarly has some clean water challenges in some other spots. So we aren't ignoring those other areas, but I do think we can learn from the focus on some of these key areas and then apply some of those learnings more generally, and that's helpful as well.
Yeah, and thank you for that comment. I think you hit the nail on the head. So we're implementing a lot of these strategies citywide, everywhere, with the best information that we have. And what we're going to do with that flood risk reduction strategy and the clean water strategy is hopefully develop some strategies that are scalable so that we can take the work that we're doing in those focus geographies and expand them citywide. So I think there's lessons to be learned there, but we're certainly keeping in mind that it's a citywide. These issues are spread throughout the city, and so we want to make sure that whatever we do in those spaces is something that we can transfer to other places. So thanks. Yeah.
And of course, yes, we've gotten a lot of really good partnership work with Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. There's a bigger chunk of our city in 9 Mile Creek Watershed District, and I think candidly, Minnehaha Creek Watershed District has been at it longer, and they've had some learnings they've been able to transfer throughout their whole area, and hopefully we can help apply some of those same learnings to the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District and build a good, strong partnership with them as well.
Yeah, we do a lot of work with 9 Mile Creek Watershed District too, and I think you're right. I think there's always opportunities to grow there, and I think we've got a really strong base, and there's some growth there too.
And then finally, I just want to mention one thing which I mentioned, I think it was 2 years ago, we talked about the comprehensive water plan and the challenges we have here. And I mentioned this then, that what we're talking about really in this almost 500 pages is principally surface water issues. I think they are inevitably connected to subsurface water issues. And I do want to encourage us to always think about how we can create healthy subsurface waters, how we can have our groundwater policies be wise and have some policies about those. Edina taps the aquifers below our city for our drinking water, and we use a lot of that. I imagine many of our neighboring communities do as well. Minneapolis does not. They use the river. But we want to make sure that we have wise long-term policies so we don't overstress our aquifers and so that we are good long-term inhabitants of this space and we're doing right by future generations. So I just want to encourage some consideration of that as we think about this in the future and make sure that we're doing right by future Edina residents. So, thank you.
Thank you. Member Stewart. Member Fisher?
So could you tell me that the 2019 and 2020 plans, the more, what'd you call them, sort of the strategies,
Mm-hmm.
that isn't in the document, right?
Correct, it is not. So what we did is just laid out a kind of a framework saying that was an implementation item, like we'll commit to doing those strategies.
Okay. I read through the document before our previous meeting, didn't read through it again this time. Was there new stuff from 2 weeks ago? Is that what you're telling me, Member Stewart?
No, it was...
You were referring to years, okay, I got it. Anyway, that's not the point.
Okay.
The point is, interesting juxtaposition, because Mr. Potts was here really asking us to just, let's not talk generational, let's talk what can we do tomorrow to make this better, because we have some serious problems. And what I'm hearing and what I'm reading is that it's not that easy. And you've been very patient with us as we're always asking these sort of questions, trying to get to the heart of, well, what can we do tomorrow to make this better? And my sense is that, like on a commercial level, which is more normally what we see, what we're approving on a meeting by meeting basis, when a developer comes to us and we're talking about their projects, in almost every case that I can recall, we're making the conditions better through the stormwater and all of that, because we're just absolutely requiring that to even for them to be considered for an approval. On the single family home basis, a lot of these tear downs and everything, I'm not sure I have that same level of confidence that the situation's getting better in each one of those cases. I think what I'm hearing you say is that it's not even that easy to say that, you know, if you tear down a house and build a new one, we need the stormwater, we need it to be in a better condition. Because sometimes, if I'm hearing you right or understanding, that it's putting a pressure on our system that's not able to accept it. So are there potentials, without getting into the nitty-gritty details, are there opportunities from a policy level for things like storage or containment for so many hours that water can't even leave your site? And are those things that we could press and make sort of a difference in that way? You know, so in other words, if you're filling X amount of your site, maybe you have to hold that water for a certain amount of time.
I can see Ross just wants to get on this one.
I think the problem that you described in the juxtaposition of commercial versus residential, that's something that, for me, really demonstrates where our plan sits in the hierarchy of plans with our neighboring watershed districts. So we follow the policies of the neighboring watershed districts who plan this for their whole watershed area, and our plans have to follow the policy lead of them. And they choose where to go with their limited resources. And they've essentially chosen to focus on the big wholesale land use changes, and they haven't gone to the retail level to solve this issue in single family areas. Because the long-term assumption of the past has been that they're already developed, they're not changing. But we know they are changing, and it's a slow change that happens on, you know, one small patio project at a time. And that's a gap that we've been really working to get those watershed partners aware of and starting to think of, so that, you know, when we put policy language in this document, it's not brand new and leading, but it works with some sort of framework that the districts have. But then to your implementation point, yes, that's possible. And I think the flood risk reduction strategy, if we're successful, gives you a range of options between new capital, policy options, programmatic things, operations and maintenance activities that all work to provide flood protection service in a better way and more comprehensive way in the residential areas.
Just because I realize that, you know, we have to be careful. We only have, you know, we can't just go out and build all new systems, all new pipes and everything. But these properties are being redeveloped one at a time. It's making a difference, not in a positive way right now, is my sense. And it feels like there might be a way to accelerate some policy decisions that would not necessarily immediately. So yes, we have to be responsible and invest capital over time and try and pick our best overall infrastructure projects. But I think we have to get pretty aggressive on this whole tear down thing and what that impact is and what we might require. You know, it could be green roofs. You know, you can hold water on a green roof for X amount of time so it's not into the system at the same time as all the other water. You know, whether it's the underground storage, whatever it is, I think it has to become part of the cost of filling up these sites like what's happening. And it just can't continue to be, it's the neighbor's problem and then the next neighbor's problem. And you know, you can just sort of see it happening. So I don't know, you know, it's probably that next level. And that's the part that I still struggle with this really big document. And it's a phenomenal amount of information, and the work that's gone into it is really impressive. But from a policymaker's perspective, it's hard to know what part to bite off and how we make that difference, as Mr. Potts was saying earlier. You know, how does that help those folks tomorrow? And it seems like there's got to be some stuff that can happen that soon from a policy direction.
Thank you. Member Brindle.
Thank you. A couple of things. I did see the comment in the letter from the Met Council about this plan being used as a model for other cities, and I just take that as a huge compliment, and commend you for your expertise, your leadership in this project, and making it what it is. And what I think it is, and I think I might be right on this, and that is that it's our moment in time, that this is what our plan is today. We've got some strategies, we've got projects we know we want to try, how will the results of some of those, like the flood risk reduction project in Morningside, how will that come around and inform a future version of this plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is a plan that's for the next 10 years, and it's a living document. And so as we learn and as we make changes to the system, we can adapt to those.
Okay.
With the flood risk reduction strategy or clean water strategy, those are going to be major components, and those will probably be a major amendment to this plan as those are completed and get incorporated into that guiding document. So we've also outlined, we haven't done a flood risk reduction strategy or clean water strategy. This is a new approach to kind of addressing those issues. And so we initially are thinking that they're going to be like shorter term 5-year things, so they're a little bit more actionable in the short term, and then we can revisit those a little bit more frequently than like the 10-year local water plan also.
Sure. On occasion, we see a residential project here. We haven't seen one in a long time, but we saw one on Creek Valley Road. We saw one that was being built adjacent to Meadowbrook Golf Course. And we always have that discussion about handling stormwater on that property, and whether it's French drains or it's rain gardens or it's just grading or whatever it might be to manage the stormwater that falls on that property. And I don't know how the Planning Commission talks about stormwater management. So I'd be really curious to find out, do they engage homeowners when they talk about these major rebuild and remodel projects? How detailed do they get in discussing stormwater? So I think that's a box that I'd like to put on my list to look at, because as I'm sitting here listening to this conversation, I'm realizing that we got to say that this is important to us. And I want to make sure that comes through, whether somebody's putting a patio in, they're putting a porch on, whatever they're doing, that stormwater is part of what they think about. The other thing, and I know that's not really in the purview of this plan, but it's education. When someone's got kind of a landlocked stormwater pond next to their house or in their neighborhood, it can get really rancid. And so and I look at that as the water in our community, and so to some degree, to the extent that we can anyway, providing some educational tools for residents of what they can plant in there that would filter some of that. People who live along Lake Harvey, Lake Edina, Lake Cornelia, Arrowhead Lake, Indian Head Lake, the things that they can do for buffer gardens to filter the water that flows from their property into the lake, which is inevitable. But just some educational materials. I don't want to stack things on your to-do list, but it would affect the health of that body of water if people were educated about what they should and shouldn't do. And it probably comes from the watershed more so than from the city. But I'd like to see us maybe have something available to residents. So thank you for all this work. There is work being done in different parts of the United States. We have a relative who lives on a lake in New York, and he is out there doing some of the experimentation that the University of Minnesota is working with you on how to counteract what's happening at Lake Cornelia, which ultimately affects Lake Edina. So without further ado, I just thank you for all the work and the work that you'll continue to do on this.
Thank you. During the years I've been on the council, we've done, I think, a very good job of looking forward in a way about of thinking about where we want our town to be in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and it primarily has evolved around land use and for trying to foretell the future there, and in our comprehensive plan work, we do it there and try to come up with a 10-year overview of where we think our town is heading. And this goes to what Member Staunton is talking about. I think it addresses that same sort of issue as what he wants to have a conversation about. And I don't quite know how to have it, but what we're seeing now, and thank goodness you did this 10-year plan that looks at flood protection, stormwater runoff management, clean surface water issues, and then to start you identified these key geographies in Morningside with respect to stormwater runoff and Lake Cornelia for clean water. But this Atlas 14 is telling us that we have a whole new level of risk that we're facing that we've never faced before. And I think in the last 10 years that I've been on the council, the floodplain maps from FEMA have changed at least twice. So here we are with a changing atmospheric condition that's creating more and more water. And I think we're trying to figure out, how do we get ahead of this? I mean, you think about Holland being a country that's maybe 15 feet below the North Sea, and they've spent an enormous amount of money protecting themselves. But if we have an event where it costs us $500 million, we're going to look at ourselves, and the council is going to look at itself and say, what held us back from trying to make decisions that were expensive at the time, but protected and insulated our town as best we could from the ravages of a 10-inch rain like we had, or a 15-inch rain like we had in 1987. So how do we get there sooner rather than later? And what's the cost of that? And that's the conversation I think Member Staunton wants to have with our community, is to say, listen, this is a real problem. This is a real danger to everybody in our community. You don't have to be in the floodplain now to be worried about this, because we've got all these potential problems coming our way, told to us by NOAA that is doing it on a scientific basis. So some of the little things that we can do, Member Brindle and Member Fisher talked about, it seemed like, you talked about one patio at a time. We're talking to the watershed district. Why aren't we having this conversation about reduced impervious surfaces on the tear down rebuilds? I think it's probably an issue whose time has come. I mean, we reduce impervious surface and at least figure out how to do that and help a little bit there. We do more stormwater management or demand more stormwater management on site, whether it's commercial or residential. We're starting down that road, and I think that's smart to be thinking about that. But there are catastrophes potentially ahead that we could try to do something about if our residents want to do something about it. But we need to have that conversation with them, because this is a potentially really serious problem. Anybody that's had a pinprick leak in a water pipe at their house knows the kind of damage water can cause with just a little stream. But if we face a flood of a magnitude we've never seen before in this town, and we could have done something about it, shame on us. But our residents have got to be there with us, because it's going to be expensive. So to Member Staunton's point, let's ask our town if they want to have that conversation, because we've got a plan for 10 years. But if they want to accelerate it, then tell us, and we'll talk about ways to do it. Member Staunton?
Yeah, I'm just kind of looking back, Ms. Wilson, at your memo and the incorporating feedback section. You talk about this flood risk reduction strategy and the clean water strategy and the Morningside issues in the Morningside neighborhood for the flood risk reduction and Lake Cornelia for the clean water. I mean, those are just examples. I mean, those are right. I mean, there's other places where that could happen. You're talking about doing a case study or a pilot to figure out what's feasible and what works, or how much it would cost and what kind of cost benefit you'd have? Is that the idea?
Yeah, so we initially suggested kind of this longer term incremental generational approach, and we heard from council and some community members that let's do something more actionable and let's see some other benefits in the short term. What will it take is essentially what we were hearing. And I think with the flood risk reduction strategy, that gives us an opportunity to zero in on a specific geography. You can call it a pilot or a case study. I think those words would still apply to this focused geography area. And then we can tell you, okay, if we're going to solve this problem or try to solve, it's going to be really, really tough. What's it going to take? And we couldn't go to that level within the budget and the time constraint of this local water plan. So we included that strategy as an option so we can go there in this next phase, if you will, by doing that flood risk reduction strategy, which gets us to those details. You know, what's it going to cost? Where are we going to put these things? What kind of benefit can we see? What damages are we going to see with certain size events? And what can we do to mitigate those risks? I think all of that was just way too big of a lift to do in this initial, what we had for our local water plan. So that's why we proposed that implementation item of, okay, well, let's do a flood risk reduction strategy where we answer that question of what's it going to take to get there. And then as far as how fast we implement it and what we're willing to do, then I think that's a discussion we can have once we have that strategy in front of you to guide that discussion.
And you noted this, that the draft, the 1919 through 2021 capital improvement plan has, as you put it, has the flood risk reduction strategy program for 2019 and the clean water strategy program for 2020. What does that mean?
So we set aside some money, or we're essentially making a request in that CIP to complete the study. And then we also just earmarked some number in a future year if we were going to implement it, although we don't know quite what those implementation activities would be. That'd be an outcome of that strategy.
That's the chicken egg thing. We
Right.
have to do the study before we can know how much
So we
it would
put a
cost to make it.
placeholder number in there just based on some engineering judgment, but that is really a black box right now.
And the idea is, rather than try to do the whole city, pick out these two examples, one as an illustration of flood reduction risk strategy and one as an illustration of clean water strategy.
Yeah, and I think we heard we had some feedback that was a priority area for people, and so that's why we selected that issue area to focus that strategy.
Yeah, and I guess I want to be careful, consistent with what Councilmember Stewart said, I think. I wouldn't know how to prioritize. There's a whole, obviously the document has a whole list of different places, and some that aren't even in there that we've heard from people saying they're having issues, and I get we have to pick something to try out these strategies on.
Good. Well, yeah, really fascinating conversation. Anybody else comments at this point in time?
Well, I'm trying to think from a process perspective where to go. It does feel to me like, it would be good to hear. I know we hear from members of the public who are concerned about this. It does tend to be one of those out of sight, out of mind things. You hear when people are having issues, and then other people are aware that their neighbors are having issues and they're trying to figure out what are we doing about this and how aggressive are we being. And I'd like to see us kind of reach out and hear from folks about, is this an issue that they want us to dedicate some priority to or not, and how people are feeling about it. And I know you've done a lot of that through the course of this since June of 2016. But it wouldn't seem to me that it would hurt to have around here where we've got this kind of semi-final version of what we're going to adopt, and we're doing it in conjunction with our comprehensive plan. Why not hear from our public about, what do they think? Are there things we should include in it? And really to this issue that we're framing in the discussion tonight about how much intervention, how aggressive should we be, how big an issue, how high a priority is it for us?
I was thinking that when you were having the colloquy with Jessica, that when you talked about the flood protection plan, being formulated, that maybe when that was finished, that staff work was finished, that might be an appropriate time. I thought that's maybe where you were heading in terms of a public engagement, when we had something that people could actually look at and think about.
I think this document, for people that are really tuned into this document, they probably already read it. So what we're doing is giving them an opportunity to verbalize and vocalize what they would see as, and which I think might fit into, I don't see a lot of changes probably happening on this big document policy, the document, but if we know that we're going to do something in the 2019 and 2020 in these two areas, people might have a lot of ideas about where we might want to focus that effort before we start the planning work. So it could be really great timing to get the feedback on the big document, but also directionally, what they might want to see.
Right, to your question, Mr. Mayor, maybe it's a yes and. Maybe it's now, and then as we kind of develop the flood risk reduction strategy. Yeah. I'm resisting the temptation to use the acronym.
Flood protection.
As we develop that, then there's another round of how are we doing, where's this going, how much. I mean, I know I've had discussions with each of you offline about the curve and where are you getting your most bang for the buck, and then where does it start to taper off where you're not making much progress for a lot more money. And we want to figure out where that sweet spot is so that we can do some intervention, but do it in a cost-efficient way.
If I could just add one more comment. If you think about, our staff have a lot of expertise, and you're working with folks that have probably even more expertise. There's a whole contingent of really smart people working on this. We have sort of this whole city policy look, but what the public brings is the expertise in being, they're local experts. They're seeing this as close up as you can possibly see it, right? They're seeing buildings coming down next to them and the impacts. They're seeing what's happening in their basements and their backyards. And I think having that input at this time is really important.
Member Brindle?
I'm going to move adoption of the 2018 Comprehensive Water Resources Management Plan.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Further discussion?
So I think it's a little premature before we hear more. I think it's in a good place, and I'd like to hear from the public about if they think there's other things that we should add to it or other things that we should emphasize or how we go from here. And I think if we can get it adopted in conjunction with our comprehensive plan, ultimately, is there some immediacy to the adoption of it now?
This plan has to be adopted before the comp plan. I don't know if we can adopt them at the same time. This one typically is adopted first and then feeds into that comp plan.
Sure.
We do have, within 120 days, once we get watershed district approval, we're supposed to seek council approval. However, we had a really one watershed district that lagged way behind the other one, so I'm not sure exactly kind of like
which
if we
one
were
counts?
go to the count the days, kind of what that would look like. I think to your other comment about engaging the public and then who the experts are, and I think we struggled even as water resource experts on where do we put policy, where do we prioritize, how, what's the pace and what are the goals. I think those are going to be really difficult questions for the public to answer at this high level. So our intention was with the flood risk reduction strategy to have some options, and recognizing that the experts in designing and addressing flooding issues would be those engineers, and then the local experts, the neighbors that really know, what do I value about my neighborhood, and what kind of risk do I feel, and what is that fear of a rain event mean to me in my neighborhood. I think recognizing where those experts are, I think bringing that flood risk reduction strategy to them with some options, and then saying, what are your concerns and what are you willing to have some trade-offs? I think that might be a more rich engagement opportunity. I think at this level, so far when we've engaged the public, we had a public comment period back in November, and we received few comments, and I think it's just, it's hard to comment on those things because it's a pretty complicated topic. So I think if we can get a little further into that flood risk reduction strategy and have some options and then ask people to weigh the trade-offs, that might be a more rich engagement opportunity at that level.
Other questions?
I mean, it is a chapter of the comprehensive plan. So when you adopt the comp plan, you adopt this chapter by reference, whatever condition it's in, I suppose, at the time.
Well, if we adopted it based on the motion and the second tonight, could we press forward with some of the issues around stormwater management and clean surface water and potentially amend that chapter before it's finished?
The chapter in the comp plan is in draft right now, so we'd certainly be willing to take some feedback on what you'd like to see kind of elevated from this local water plan into that chapter of the comp plan. It's still a fluid draft at this point.
So I see what you did there. We're all about the puns. All right, so maybe back up to your slide, because you had a slide on this, if we could.
This one?
This one. So I'm a little confused. So we've got the local water plan, and then that's going to be a part of the water resources chapter. So the water resources chapter is in the draft stage now?
We are drafting up that chapter of the comp plan.
And that will include a water supply plan and a wastewater plan, and then this plan.
It will reference all of those plans, but then just kind of high level describe what those plans do, the services they provide. Some policy might drift up to that level of that water resources chapter. And then I think to your point about one water and groundwater and surface water and drinking water and how they're all connected, that's a key goal, is to kind of describe that dynamic in that chapter also.
So the dissatisfaction I'm feeling is it feels like I want to have a place to say, I think this is a really big deal and that we ought to make it a big deal and that it should be a priority even though we don't know what we're going to do yet about it. And I don't feel like we're saying that anywhere, and I want to have a feeling that we're saying that somewhere, and at the same time, the other issue is, maybe I'm the only one who feels that way, but is our public feeling that way, and do we want them to weigh in at this point on that topic?
Two other key decisions that will come before you, I think, yet this year, are you're going to be setting a capital improvement plan for 19 to 23. There's a lot of the recommendations that flow from this chapter and the water resource chapter in that CIP recommendation that's bubbling up. Then there's the utility rate study. So there's two big and consequential things that come up. And this, we're suggesting a kind of a burn rate where you're focusing on one in 19 and one on 20. And we've kind of described the justifications for those, but I think there's a lot of trade-offs you'd have to consider if you want them faster.
Yeah, Councilmember Stone, members of council, I think the place, the time and place that where you could make a statement about this is important and I want more emphasis on it is during the CIP planning process, because you'll have a separate section that talks a lot about stormwater drainage, and also in our work planning process where we're going to be taking a body of work and adding some prioritization to it from the policy making, decision making standpoint.
It also strikes me, I'm thinking about some of the language in the existing comp plan that you've two worked on so hard back in 2008. That became language that was used in a loftier way to describe issues that you anticipated would be a concern over a 10-year period of time. It seems to me that this water resources chapter offers that same opportunity to put in lay speak what we think is important to think about. But then you've got the ability now to reference the comprehensive water management plan as a resource for the comments you're making regarding the high level of importance of addressing this issue over, the time ahead. Not just the time, that 10-year time horizon, but even sooner than that. So that's another possible place I see where you can use the kind of language we think would be important to use in stressing the importance of this, dealing with these three problems.
And maybe, Member Staunton, and frankly, this diagram is really helpful because I've been going through this document as though it's literally a chapter in the comp plan. But the reality is, as I'm hearing you and looking at the diagram, these are just big, in a sense, engineering kind of documents that become the backbone that most people, which explains why I struggled reading through it, by the way. It's a lot of information. But as you described the water resources chapter in the comp plan, it's written in a way that gets right to what are our primary goals, what are we trying to do, what is the system that we call water resources, and maybe that is the place that so this whole this years of work you're doing is really getting the guts of that, and there's not a lot to debate about it. It's just a lot of data and facts, and we aren't quite there at the sort of the making decisions on the policy piece quite yet. And maybe that's clearly where people are going to want to engage. I just want to make sure, and I'm extra sensitive about this because I think the count is now 160 public meetings that we've had on the comp plan, and there are a few folks out there saying, well, we hadn't had public meetings. The last thing I want to do is stamp approved on a piece of the comp plan that didn't have technically it had opportunity for feedback, but there wasn't sort of that public level, meeting. And if that's going to happen before we have a chapter approved in the comp plan, then I could be okay with that. But that's the part I'm trying to wrestle with.
And maybe that's the part that's been a bit of a disconnect, because I think this slide actually helps, because it one way of looking at it is this local water plan, or the comprehensive water resource management plan, is kind of the technical document that describes what's here in the list of projects that we think are necessary at some pace. But the water resources, I keep envisioning this document that sounds more like a comprehensive plan that says, here's the story we're telling. We've had, we're having change in climate, we're having change in development, we're seeing more flood issues, we've got this map that shows where they are, and we recognize that this is a developing issue and we need to get out in front of it. And so we're going to try and do that in a variety of different ways, and here's the things that we're going to try out to see what works most effectively, what's most cost effective. And we're going to explore what we would have to do with the rate study. We're going to explore what we might do in a pilot project to see what works and how fast it works. That's the kind of overview that isn't really in this document, but I feel like, I really feel like we need to say that, and I want to hear from our public before we put the final touches on that. So I agree with Councilmember Fisher. If we can do that as part of the water resources chapter, then I'm okay. Then this is the technical component, and that becomes the policy piece, if you will, the policy statement that we make as a council about what's a priority moving forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think. I like that. Yeah, I like that idea too, because then when we go to the public to talk about it, before we frame up the language for the water resources chapter, we've adopted something that we can use as a basis for the conversation, which is the water resources management plan.
Right, and it does have these, you've identified kind of the need to do the flood risk reduction strategy and the water quality strategy. So I guess I could be okay with that. And then what's in terms of time frame and process, where we've got the CIP coming to us, I assume, sometime this fall.
Sometime in October.
Okay, so that's one stopping point. And then, as part of the comprehensive plan, Carrie, will will this water resources chapter go to the planning commission and then come to us, or?
It will.
So that could be part of that public input processes I assume as we start to stitch together all the chapters of the comprehensive plan, we'll have another round of public input.
We will, once we've got all the chapters finished, they'll be posted, and we would solicit feedback on those draft chapters at that time.
And so that would be an opportunity for members of the public who are concerned about this to make sure they get to share with us what they think about that.
And for those, that small group of people who are completely dialed into this, they can certainly, if they're reading this and keeping up, they can certainly forward their comments now as well. So
right.
It's not that anyone's comments are being not wanted.
Okay,
good.
So with all that understanding about the process and the place for a policy stake in the ground, if you will, then I'm okay with proceeding with the motion.
Okay, so we've got a motion and a second to adopt the 2018 Comprehensive Water Resources Management Plan. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And Manager Neal. Yeah, thank you. This is really some high-quality work.
Thank you.
As best we can tell.
I hope I can meet that standard as well. Well, good evening. I don't get a chance to do this very often, but this one's important. Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, it's my privilege to stand before you tonight and ask for you to formally receive the September 5, 2018 Racial Equity Implementation Report and to give staff the formal direction to move forward with the implementation of the staff responses, actions in the report. I don't have a formal presentation for you tonight other than a few verbal comments, and then I'll be happy to take your questions. As the elected leaders of this community, you set an important process into motion on December 6, 2016, when you approved the creation of the Edina Race and Equity Task Force. You energized the resident-led task force with a purpose, which was to recommend policies and practices and strategies for the city of Edina to identify and eliminate race-based disparities in Edina city government facilities, services, and institutions. In January and February 2017, the City Council interviewed interested residents and then populated 27 positions on the task force and its 3 working groups. In April and May of 2017, the task force recommended, and then the council selected the Citizens League to serve as the advisor and facilitator to the task force. Simultaneously, the City Council authorized the city's participation in the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, the GARE program, which was managed by the League and continues to be managed by the League of Minnesota Cities. The GARE training has been integral to the task force and the staff's work in getting us to this place where we are tonight with the council. The task force, working groups, and the city staff members assigned to support this initiative worked diligently over the next 12 months on the initiative. The task force shared a draft of its final report to the City Council at your May 1st, 2018 work session. And the council formally accepted the final report of the task force at your May 15th, 2018 meeting. When the council accepted the task force final report, you also directed staff to evaluate the feasibility and advisability of the report's 21 recommendations and then to make a report back to the City Council with findings and recommendations in September 2018. City staff did that. We met with the City Council in a work session format on August 21st, 2018 to review what we now call the Racial Equity Implementation Report. Council members asked questions and provided feedback to us about the report. Staff incorporated council feedback into the report, renamed it the September 5, 2018 Racial Equity Implementation Report, and added it to this evening's agenda for final action. With final action by the council, staff will begin the process of implementing the staff responses to the task force recommendations. This will, in my judgment, make Edina a better place to live and a better place to work. I said in my opening statement that it is my privilege to be in front of you tonight to ask for your final action on this report, and I mean that sincerely, as I get to be the person who represents the residents and staff members whose massive investment of time, energy, and creativity has brought us to this opportunity tonight. I'm grateful for their dedication to this community, as I am sure you are as well. That concludes my formal comments, and I'm happy to stand for any questions the council may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Manager Neal. Questions for Manager Neal or comments regarding the work plan or the implementation of the report that we've previously accepted? I think we've had these conversations in work session, and we've had some of our folks here. One of our co-chairs is here this evening, Jessie Kingston, one of our residents. We thank her for coming over this evening to back up Manager Neal and also answer any questions, I'm sure, if we had any for her. So there's a three-part action here. One is the motion to receive the August 28, 2018 Racial Equity Implementation Report. Number two, to accept the staff responses as proposed. And number three, to direct the staff to move forward with the implementation of the staff response actions, which were all included in our materials for this particular council meeting. Member Stewart.
Thank you. Just want to clarify, this is not a sort of pass it tonight and we're done process. This is a process we are undertaking that could take years and years of gradual steps to get to, implement proposals. And there are many proposals or recommendations that came out of the task force, some of which we're addressing immediately and trying to make progress on those, other of which are not quite as immediate, but aren't going to be ignored. Those are going to be addressed further down the road. But it's a function of trying to take all of these recommendations and build first a foundation and then sort of a culture among staff, among our facilities managers, and among everything else, so that we as a city are doing everything we can to be a welcoming community for all people. Is that a fair summary, Mr. Neal?
Councilmember Stewart, members of council, yes, that's a fair summary. This is by no means a statement of problem solved, let's move on. This document in many ways is a statement of aspirations of here's what we want to do going forward. There are major themes in among the recommendations about employee selection, employee training, police practices and policies, but a lot of information gathering. I think that the task force found in some cases that we didn't have sufficient information for them to draw better conclusions for. So some of their recommendations are about gathering more information. One of the aspects of this that I think is very important is how we have structured the accountability measure in it, and that is really to measure accountability through our Human Rights and Relations Commission, and then ultimately to the City Council. So we give both of those entities periodic reports on how we're doing.
Mr. Mayor, if I could chime in.
Yes, Member Staunton.
I appreciate that this is a long term. The one thing I would point out, and correct me if I'm wrong, is as we go through the document, really the implementation talks largely about 2018, 2019, a little bit of 2020. So we are making a commitment with this to get at it here in the next year and a half. And I don't think we can overstate or state too many times the baseline reason behind this, and that is that we had people in our community, people of color in our community, came to us and said that they did not feel welcome, included, didn't feel like they belonged. And we responded to that by investigating that further. And the folks who volunteered their time and energy, as you so eloquently put it, talked to and engaged a lot of other folks and confirmed a lot of that feeling in our community. And as a council member and as a city council as a whole, we can't just ignore people who come to us and say that we don't feel like we're included or that we belong. And so it's important we can do what we can do about this, and that's city government and the institutions, the facilities, the services, and I think this is in exactly the right step in the right direction. The other thing that I would point out that for folks who are watching what we're doing is this is not a zero-sum game. By doing this, we are not making other people's lives less high quality. We are asking that everybody have a high quality experience and an inclusive and belonging experience in our community. And there's nothing about doing that diminishes anybody else's experience. So I think it's important to remember that as we move forward on this. And I want to again thank Jesse and the task force and all the working group members and the people who came forward to participate in that whole process. And I think staff has done a terrific job of going through the report, and I am wholeheartedly behind your recommendations. I don't know whether we need to change them to September 5th because we ended up having to delay this from last time.
I would. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you.
Thank you. Member Fisher?
Well, that was just really eloquently stated, and so I'm not going to repeat a lot of that, but I agree wholeheartedly with comments that have been made. The one thing I would say is it's about aspirations, but this is also, when we vote on this, this is let's go, right? We're beginning, and we've had the task force did a terrific job putting together their study, their report, and I would say, and I complimented them at the time and the way it was formatted and put together. It's just a very easy document to understand, to read through, and to sort of get what we're trying to do. And I would compliment staff similarly for sticking with how you responded to that document and put it in a format where anybody that picks this up can see what the plan is. And so what this is hopefully us saying is, yes, let's do this. Let's start right now. And so thanks to everyone who's participated up to this point.
Good. Thank you, Member Fisher. Member Brindle?
Thank you. We've been through this report, and I appreciate your implementation process. It makes it understandable. One thing that stands out for me is on page 19 where it talks about the languages. And it says, for example, Spanish, Hmong, Somali. How will the languages be determined? We have French immersion in our city. How will the languages be determined? This is in item D under 18. On page 18, continues to page 19. So in D, it's a shaded paragraph, ensure each facility has wayfinding. And then language is part of that wayfinding. So it talks about at least 3 top non-English primary languages. And I don't know how we're going to determine what are top non-English primary languages. When I look at Bloomington is one of the most accessible websites, and they provide all their brochures in 5 languages. And so I guess I'd look at that as what they consider to be the top 5. I suppose it would be the last census that would tell us what native languages are spoken here in our demographics. Yeah. But that's the only thing that popped out at me that might need some consideration. And I don't know how you're going to determine what those top languages are.
Sure. Councilmember Brindle, members of council, really almost how you just explained it. We'll do some looking through resources that already exist. We'll probably do some of our own survey work as well. We'll be doing our 2019 Quality of Life survey in the spring, so that'll give us another data point. But I think there are many cities that have done this kind of work, and so we're going to be looking for an example of that as well and develop a standard for how we will choose.
Okay, thanks.
For me, I think in its simplest sort of form, I feel like everybody wants to feel like they belong somewhere. And we have people in our community, whether they were born and raised here or moved here, they come here because, and they stay here because they want to feel that they're part of a community. And we decided as a city government, that we want to be a welcoming and inclusive place. And so how we treat people as a city government is really important in setting a model of, for the future, I think. And we went through that exercise of looking at all these different institutional activities, whether they be in facilities or otherwise. And I commend the whole team that worked on this, our whole task force, and we've commended them before. But I think, and our colleagues up here on the dais have spoken so well about this issue, that we're headed in a good direction, and we're headed there sooner rather than later. And we've got some good things ahead of us here, and we're going to be a better town for it. So thank you for the report. Is there a motion on those three elements?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we had a motion and a second to receive the August 28th.
We'll do the September 5th. I think it's been
Yeah, September.
recaptured.
I noticed that too. It was
Right.
September 5th. Receive the September 5th, 2018 Racial Equity Implementation Report. Accept the staff responses as proposed to the report and direct staff to move forward with the implementation of the staff response actions. Got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of its passage say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manager Neal. Next matter in front of us is our resolution that we see every couple of weeks, thanks to the generosity of our residents. It's dealing with donations. Resolution 2018-79, accepting donations on behalf of the City of Edina. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And I didn't see Jim Nelson.
Yep, he was out there.
It was blocked by the computer there.
Ah.
L&L. Maybe Jim, can you hear me? No. My apologies for not recognizing Jim Nelson from the Human Rights and Relations Commission. He was blocked by the computer, and I couldn't see that there was another person in the audience. So anyway, back to the resolution accepting donations. We get the Park and Rec Department, some in-kind donations for the Arts Center. And then Mark Mudra, who happens to be my neighbor, $600 for a memorial bench for Harry Mudra. And then another tree donation by Jiao Su and Joyce Lee. Very nice. Thanks, folks. And we'll have those donors' names on our website. Anything that's come in on the dais this evening, other than what was here when we arrived?
No,
Okay.
no, sir.
And then we have a petition regarding noise wall for rejecting the noise wall that's been proposed between Waterford Court and Lincoln Drive, and we need to receive that petition and have staff, direct staff to take a look at it and advise other folks that might be interested or have a contrary view of this matter.
So moved.
Is there a motion to accept the petition?
So moved.
We got a motion. We got a second? Any further discussion? All those in favor of receiving the petition regarding the noise wall on 169 between Waterford Court and Lincoln Drive, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Aviation noise update, Member Brindle.
I do have one. The next Noise Oversight Committee meeting is September 19th at 1:30 at the Metropolitan Airport Commission headquarters on 28th Avenue. And there are some things of note on the agenda for that meeting. There's a benchmark study going on to identify best practices in airport noise management throughout North America. And so there will be a report on that. And then there will be a couple of guest speakers. Brian Ricks will talk about the MSP, the update at MSP Airport. And then we're going to hear from a gentleman from Boeing who will talk about the eco demonstrator. So this is, I did not realize they were doing this. So they have a package installed in aircraft now, and it records the various environmental conditions that occur during a flight. So airport noise is one of them. And so it records its own record of what kind of noise it generates. So looking at where the complaints are generated and where they come from, and then comparing that with the track record of the aircraft itself should be pretty interesting. So, and it's all in improving the noise as well as the efficiency, including carbon emissions of that aircraft. So they're getting sophisticated. So that's what I have for aviation.
Good. Thank you. Engineer Neal, any supplemental information?
Don't have anything to supplement.
All right. Council comments? Member Stewart?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Since the last council meeting, we had on Wednesday, August 22nd, there was a small area plan meeting for the 50th in France area held at the Public Works Building. That was very interesting, a lot of great input I heard at that meeting. Then Thursday, August 23rd, there was a sort of an open house at Arden Park regarding the Arden Park plan. And that was, I think, pretty well attended as well. And I want to add a lot of great volunteers from our Park and Rec Commission and from our Park and Rec Department, as well as some people from the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. All spent a lot of time answering questions from various members of the community who came to that. So kudos to them. I want to mention that the Edina Hornet football team beat Lakeville South in their first football game. I'm very happy about that. And then a tip of the hat for Labor Day. I think it's often people don't stop and think about why we have some of these holidays, but the plight of the American worker historically has been quite a struggle, and the advent of unions, the unions since have suffered from some corruption and other things, as have all institutions, but for the most part, the unions have done a good job of representing the needs of the worker and helping us as a nation get to our level of productivity and standard of living that we have today. So just a tip of the hat for that. Coming up this weekend, Fall into the Arts at Centennial Lakes. It's a great opportunity to get out, see some art, and enjoy our wonderful Centennial Lakes facility. A lot going on there. And then coming up, starting next week, the Jewish high holidays. I believe September 9th begins Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. And then following September 18th begins Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. So we wish very blessed holidays to our Jewish friends and neighbors. And because of all of that, the next city council meeting is pushed back to a Thursday, on Thursday, September 20th. So that's it.
Good. Thank you. Member Brindle.
All right. A couple of things. When we look at what's happening on the comprehensive plan, we talk about it from the standpoint of zoning and the small area plans. But we haven't really been talking about it from the perspective of the various commissions and what's happening in the commissions themselves. And looking at the minutes, I'm not seeing anything specific about what the recommendations are coming through the various commissions for their inclusion in the comprehensive plan. Is it preliminary? Is it too preliminary for that information to be made public? Or is something going to, I'm hearing questions about some of the recommendations and whether we can see them.
The work with each of the commissions has been taking place through our Planning Commission work sessions, which take place in advance of our Planning Commission meetings. So each commission has been responsible for a certain chapter, and each commission has presented to the Planning Commission their edits. The consultant has included those edits into the draft, and he's completed those and given them back to each commission. So currently each commission is reviewing the consultant's edits to make sure that what they've recommended that those comments are all included in the plan. We're hoping to get those back in the next few weeks. So that work is ongoing, but you're not seeing it in our regular commission meeting minutes because it's taking place at our work sessions.
All right, so do you have any idea when any of those drafts might come our way?
Right now, we're in the process of putting together a master schedule for how we're going to bring the whole thing to completion. I don't want to say specific dates yet, as we're still working on it, but
okay,
it will be in the next few months.
Well, it has to be. So, all right, and then a couple things. I got an email on an event, the Missing Middle Housing, responding to the demand for walkable urban living. Looks interesting. It's senior, middle to low income workforce housing between single family homes and mid-rise and high-rise. And so that session is September 26th at the Minnesota History Center with a 5:30 check-in and a 7 o'clock presentation, and that's PM. It's presented by ARP and AIA St. Paul. And then I saw an article, and many of you I'm sure did, saw the compelling article in Monday's paper about the tent community growing in Minneapolis at Cedar and about Cedar and Hiawatha. And I want to call out and say thank you to the city of Minneapolis for embracing people where they are and assisting them and supporting them where they are. And so it's a combination of the Native American community in the city of Minneapolis to support that community, and it's really laudable. They've got a few months to get some work done to find some more permanent housing for these folks, because that's going to be a tough place to be in the winter. I was just in Denver for here comes Jim. I said, come back. You want to recognize him.
Thank you.
But I was just in Denver and took light rail from the airport to downtown Denver where the conference was. And we went past a couple of villages that were constructed by the city of Denver to house people who are homeless. And these are tiny houses. So they're kind of in a cluster and sort of a semicircle and a couple of rows of them. And they're identical dwellings, and each has a different color door and a couple of steps up to the door, and hopefully some are accessible without steps. But that is how Denver is housing their homeless, is putting together these villages of tiny homes. And so I would hope to see some of that happen. You don't have to be in Minneapolis to see homeless. I know that there are people who stay in their cars around Edina, and they are known to Veep, and they're known to the police department, so they do get support. But just looking at what other cities are doing, because the homeless situation isn't going to improve without some help from the public realm. So, and the conference in Denver was Community Action Partnership, the national conference. So It was a 5-day conference. It was a long one. And I got there on Tuesday and left on Friday. And it was very good, and lots of good information about what's going on around the country and how we can learn from each other about how we deal with community action issues and making sure that we level the field as it relates to essential services for people of low income.
Good. Thank you. Member Staunton?
Let me just start by thanking Member Brindle. You know, your summary reminds me of these two areas that you're doing so much work on. The airport stuff is, I don't know that people understand how complicated and technical and what a learning curve it is. And I'm just grateful as a colleague on the council that you have taken that on, and it's really a helpful and thankless role. So I want to thank you. And then the same thing on the community action work. You know, is that it's a lot of work, and I know, are you currently chairing it?
I am.
Right, and so that is, it used to be Community Action of Suburban Hennepin County, now it's Community Action of Hennepin County, including Minneapolis, so that's an enormous task, and people in our community should recognize the work that goes into that.
Well, there are
That's really
45
helpful.
cities in Hennepin County, and one of them makes up half the work.
Yeah, exactly. And it
And
didn't exist when you first volunteered for this task.
That would be the case. That's right.
So thank you for that work. I also wanted to thank my colleagues for your indulgence in holding over the water resources plan. I did not intend to miss the last meeting. My body was quarreling with me, and so I wasn't able to be here, and I appreciate all the well wishes and your patience in letting me holding some stuff over that was important for me to weigh in on, so thank you on that. I was also going to raise the missing middle thing. I got that today and registered for it. It looks like a fascinating, you know, on the whole affordable housing front, there's a fascinating, too often we talk about it as a binary approach when it really should be an entire continuum, and that's what I take from this missing middle is there's affordability of housing is a broad continuum, and we need to recognize it as that and look for different diverse options. And I think as we as a community are thinking about affordable housing, it's important that we be thinking about it not just as either or, but instead a whole range of options. So I'm anxious to see what that's all about, and I'm planning to attend as well. Finally, I just wanted to raise a proposal with the council that I've been thinking about. There's been a lot of discussion in the community lately about our how we're developing as a community, the growth of the community, both from in some of these small areas that we're talking about planning the future. And as we have those discussions, some folks are raising issues about how does that work with our schools? And I think it is really important for us to be working closely with our schools. I think we all have good personal relationships with the school board members. I know our staff has good relationships with the school district staff as well. And we have from time to time tried to get together for meetings, but it's always a little difficult. We have these work sessions that are maybe 90 minutes, and if we have 12 people in a room, it's a little awkward. I think one of our meetings earlier tonight, people were talking about 5 to 7 as being an optimal group of people to work on things. And so what I'd like to suggest to my colleagues on the council and to City Manager Neal is maybe we consider a kind of informal committee of a couple of us here on the council and invite a couple of members of the school board to figure out some regular meetings. Maybe it's 4 times a year, maybe it's 3 times a year, but a periodic check-in just to talk about issues of common concern. We should be understanding what things they need us to do to help them, and they should be understanding what things we're contemplating, and no particular agenda other than what that group might identify. And if that group were to identify some items that need broader discussion among the city council or the school board, that could happen. So I'm throwing that out there as a suggestion, and what I'd like to do is see if staff maybe could connect with district staff to see if that's something that the school board might be interested in, and if so, we could designate a couple of members of our council to participate in that as we go forward.
Good, thank you.
And I think Manager Neal has had some conversations about this kind of stuff with school district staff as well.
Thank you, Member Staunton, members of the council. Yes, I know, I'm sure that the Edina School District would be interested in such a proposal. I also think there might be, depending on how we want to structure this, if there's a two-member kind of subcommittee of the council that's kind of attached to a two-member of the Edina School Board. But you could also, if you're not a member of that two-member part of the council, perhaps there's an assignment for the Richfield schools or the Hopkins schools. We do have 2 community meetings a year with Hopkins schools, and it's pretty customary for the city manager and a member of the elected body to come to those meetings and get an update on what's going on in Hopkins schools. So Richfield doesn't do that yet, but I know that they're thinking about doing it. So there could be that opportunity there for all of you to get some kind of school exposure.
Right. And I think, I have a chance to do a little bit of that with the Community Action, or not the Community Action, the Community Ed Services Board, Advisory Board. But it would make sense if we put something like that together to also, maybe it's Manager Neal and Superintendent Schultz as well that might be part of those meetings. So, just a thought.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you. Member Fisher.
Well, I would just say I really like that idea, and I would be happy to serve on, if something like that were to be put together, I'd be happy to be one of those two if that works out for the rest of the council. Interestingly, I've actually been over at the school district 2 or 3 times in the last few months, just because we talk so much about these big planning things, and while we have those relationships, sometimes it's really good to go and like for me, tax increment finance, right? I've been an expert in this for 20 or more years, and talk about impacts on school districts and all of that. But every once in a while, it's really good to sit down with your school district and say, let's look at real examples and what's the impact of this on a district, and to work with their finance people and to really dig in and find out the reality on that stuff. And every time I've gone over there to sit down with their staff, they have been so accommodating, and as has the superintendent, and really good people over there. So I would be excited to have more dialogue with the board members and have, just build that relationship even stronger. The other comment I would make is on the missing middle housing. I'm actually signed up for that as well, so we're going to have a good contingent. And I just want, I want to make a comment and a shout out to Hope Melton, who is working so hard out there on this citizen group she's put together, just because they care about affordable housing, and how many little things we're getting sent from Hope and her organization of just folks out there that care, and it's really those examples of leadership that happens organically in a community that you see from up here, and maybe a lot of other people don't see it, but it's always so impressive to me when people are out being leaders in their own right out in the community. So I think the other thing interesting about the missing middle is it's sponsored by 2 organizations that I happen to be part of. One I'm super excited about, it's AIA, it's American Institute of Architects. Of course, I'm part of that organization. The other is AARP, and it's just sort of, it's not like I'm celebrating that one. But I realize as I just turned 55, it's like, well, whatever. So I guess I'm part of both of those organizations.
You're eligible for the discount at Perkins now. And
that's exciting.
That's nice.
Right? I haven't thought about all the ways I could take advantage of my most recent birthday. So that's all I have.
Right, good. Yeah, and thanks. One other shout out, Jim Nelson. I couldn't see you behind the monitor here, so if you would stand up, please. I want to thank you for leading the Human Rights and Relations Commission and caring so much about this race and equity work. You sat through the entire meeting tonight, and then the mayor couldn't see you back there to even give you the appropriate sort of recognition. So I thank Mary Brindle for sending you a quick text and asking you to come back in. So thanks, Jim. Thanks for all your good work. Then I went to I was at the all-school kickoff on the 29th. That was a great event. They had, the superintendent talked a little bit about the power of storytelling, and then they had Kevin Kling, who is one of our great state assets on storytelling, and he was just fabulous. Had the teachers just really enjoying themselves and had it tied into education in such a beautiful way. So I didn't get a chance to meet him afterwards, but what a special kind of treasure for our state to have him here. Also that same day on the 29th was the 10th anniversary celebration of the Westin Hotel, 10 years in existence already. And already remodeled once. Mm-hmm. They stay on a 7-year cycle on the remodeling. Two of the people I wanted to talk about were at the anniversary event, two people that have had an extraordinary impact in our community, both with cancer. Larry Locke, who helped co-develop Centennial Lakes, struggling, I think, with esophageal cancer, lost 40 pounds. And then Warren Beck, who was owner of the Galleria and built the Westin Hotel, struggling with bone cancer and brain cancer. So both those guys meant so much to our community. I want to thank them both for the wonderful contributions they made to make Edina an even better place for people to live. Let's see, on the things that were in front of us tonight, just quickly, Lisa Lee over on Shane Drive. So Manager Neal, will somebody take a look from a staff level at the parking restrictions or some kind of placards for vehicles so we can provide some relief over there on Shane Drive? Maybe some of the other streets as well.
Yes, we are. In fact, I think this proposal was already raised by Councilmember Brindle in the previous meeting, so we are doing some research work on that idea right now.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, Member Brindle. And then Nikki Williamson, I thought, was very gracious in talking about some of the structural problems she had with her driveway and garage damage. And I don't know what exactly happened there, but maybe we could find out from the staff level what occurred, at least our perspective on that at some point in time. Fair point that the city shouldn't be turning a blind eye, and I don't think we do to problems caused by developers or builders. But I'd like to know what happened there. And then Ken Potts, of course, his suggestion of putting a limit on impervious surfaces sooner rather than later is something worth considering as well. And then on the 14th, Manager Neal, you and I are going to the Twin Cities Business Journal South Suburban Development Conference.
Golden Valley.
At Golden Valley Country Club, making a presentation as part of a group of South Suburban cities. So that's it for me. Manager Neal, you wanted to talk a little bit about a variety of things, I imagine, but especially the 2018 Edina Urban Vision Symposium.
Yes.
Get our thoughts on that.
Just a couple of things. One is just a reminder that our next, we've said it already tonight, but bears repeating. Our next council meeting is Thursday, September 20th. It's we don't have, it's a pretty rare day to have a council meeting for us on a Thursday, but the way that the religious holiday schedule worked out, that's when our meeting is. And also a reminder that next week on the 13th is an HRA meeting. It's a very full agenda. And part of that meeting will be a closed session discussion to talk about the valuation that we have for the Grandview property that's owned by the city. Finally, the item that I intended to talk about is the 2018 Urban Vision Symposium. I wanted just to make sure that I'm in tune with the council on what this is all about this year. This year, as you know, we've had previous discussions with Joe Minicozy about urban planning, with Chuck Marone about urban design and urban planning. Last year with the urban plan from ULI. And this year the proposal is around economics. dismal science, I guess, right? But really economics around development, redevelopment, around density, a lot of discussions that we have and you have with your constituents are around those subjects. And why do we care about density so much? It feels to some people like we care too much sometimes. But we've been talking about how can we better explain the impact on our future tax base, tax rates, making Edina an affordable option in the future. That's what this proposed subject is all about. That's the theme. That's the proposed theme this year. But I want to make sure that that's what you'd like to do as well. We've kind of got a date identified as October 24th. The proposal generally, I would say, is that we would have a workshop in the morning led by a consulting partner. That consulting partner would take kind of the takeaway information from that workshop because it's a large amount of dialogue. They would process that, synthesize it for council, and then council and staff would get a chance to have a kind of not a private meeting, but a meeting with that consulting team to go over what they learned later that evening in a dinner format. So does that sound, am I hitting the right themes here?
Thoughts? Yeah. Member Fisher?
I've literally had this conversation with a number of constituents where literally the question is, can you show me the data that says more density is economically better for a city? And so I struggled trying to send them materials and all that kind of stuff. But I think, so it's been a few people that have asked similar questions, which means there are a lot more that are thinking that same thing. So I sort of like the timing of that kind of discussion, if we can find the right people to come and engage. And I've mentioned this to you before. I'm more than happy to help in any way I can to sort of frame those topics and make it in a way that really can help everyone kind of understand this. So I think it's good.
If you think we're on the right path, we will begin immediately kind of preparing save the date cards and start identifying people that we want to make sure to invite to this kind of an event.
Can I ask how important October 24th is as the date?
I think it's important. We had gotten, we had gotten we'd gotten some RSVPs from you that date was going to work.
Really?
Is that not going to work now?
If you got an RSVP from me, I'll make it work.
It wasn't. I didn't get it directly.
Oh, okay.
So,
all right.
Is that a bad day for you?
I'll figure it out.
Okay.
Well, sort of. It sounds like some of the day, but an evening, kind of a supper hour type of commitment.
Oh, that makes it even worse.
Okay. So let me find out. I know that was one of the possible options we got from the consulting partner that we're talking with.
Can you recirculate
Sure.
options again?
You bet. Yep.
So that we can all look at them, please.
I don't think it would be any sooner than that. All right. I'll do it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else, Manager Neal?
That's all for me. Thanks.
Other council members think of anything else that you wanted to bring up? Member Staunton?
So I am not going to be able to be at the HRA meeting next Thursday. That is the league board annual retreat is Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, so I'll be in Ely for that, so I'm unfortunately not going to be able to be at that meeting.
We could share some of the information with you before you go.
Thursday the 13th?
Thursday the 13th.
Yeah, okay. All right. Anything else? We stand adjourned.